starting with triumphs that changed human history to disasters that shocked the entire world. From fire on the launch pad to explosions in the sky to heroes who survived space only to meet fate back on Earth. These are the most dreadful ways every legendary astronaut died. And some of these stories are so intense, you'll be wondering if space exploration was ever worth the risk. Let's start with this one that was caused by a tiny inward opening. Body Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee. The names Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee aren't just entries in a flight log. They're the reason we actually made it to the moon. They were the A-team assigned to kick off the Apollo program's space mission and prove that America owned the stars. So on January 27, 1967, the crew climbed into the Apollo 1 module for a routine plug-out test. No fuel, no engines, no countdown. In NASA's mind, it was about as dangerous as sitting in a parked car. Inside that capsule, the air was 100% pure oxygen. A single spark turned the cabin into a blast furnace, and just like that, flame erupted. Grissom and White fought that inward opening hatch like their lives depended on it, because they did. But the internal pressure turned that door into a vault, with no one able to escape the inevitable. The hardest part was that they didn't die in the vacuum of space, or the heat of reentry. They died on a Tuesday, on the ground, suffocated by carbon monoxide before the fire even reached them. It was a brutal wake-up call that the path to the moon wasn't paved with stardust, but with some incredibly expensive, incredibly avoidable mistake. While the world was still reeling from the charred remains of Apollo 1, another astronaut who knew he was flying a tin can held together by duct tape and Soviet pride. Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Komarov was the Soviet Union's golden boy, the kind of national hero who probably had his face on every lunchbox from Moscow to Vladivostok. But in 1967, he wasn't being honored. He was being served up as a sacrifice. He was tapped to pilot Soyuz 1, a shiny new spacecraft designed to prove the USSR was still the big brother of the space race, and to throw a massive 50th anniversary party for the revolution. There was just one tiny microscopic problem. The Soyuz 1 was a flying dumpster fire. The engineers knew it. The technicians knew it. Even Komarov knew he was basically strapping himself into a pressurized coffin. Reports later showed the ship had over 200 known design flaws before it even left the pad. 200? That's not a technical glitch. That's a check engine light that covers the entire dashboard. But in the name of political ego and trying to one-up Yuri Gagarin, the Kremlin decided that safety was a Western luxury they couldn't afford. Komarov launched on April 23rd, and the universe immediately checked out of the mission. A solar panel jammed, the navigation went haywire, and the ship started wobbling like a shopping cart with a bad wheel. At this point, any sane person would have pulled the ripcord. But the Soviet brass was too busy playing a high-stakes game of pretend everything is fine to admit they'd sent a man into a blender. Then came the reentry. All Komarov had to do was stick the landing, but the main parachute ghosted him. The backup chute tangled like a pair of cheap headphones in a pocket. The capsule slammed into the Earth at terminal velocity. And here's the kicker. Komarov knew it was over. According to reports, he spent his final minutes screaming in pure, unadulterated rage at the people who put him in that seat. Quite a horrifying fall from space. But somehow, the next story is even more unsettling, because this legend didn't die in space at all. Yuri Gagarin. In 1968, Yuri Gagarin was the biggest celebrity on the planet. Literally. But just 1 year after conquering the stars, he was back on Earth, grinding through routine pilot training like a rookie. At 10:30 a.m., during a standard run in a MiG-15, the radio went dead, the altitude dropped, and the man who survived the vacuum of space slammed into a Russian forest at Mach Jesus. It's the ultimate cosmic middle finger. You survive a literal rocket ride to the heavens, only to get taken out by a Tuesday morning practice lap. For decades, the Air Force, the government, and the KGB all ran their own investigations with different, conflicting stories. The rumors were wild. Some said Gagarin and his instructor had a bottle of vodka before takeoff. Others blamed a rogue Su-15 jet playing chicken, and one theory even claimed a previous pilot left a vent open, basically the aviation equivalent of leaving the fridge door cracked. It took until 2003 for the KGB to finally cough up the declassified files. The likely culprit? A cocktail of bad weather data from air traffic control and a frantic last-second swerve to avoid a weather balloon that sent the jet into a death spiral. But here's the thing. We still don't have the truth about the cause of his death. And that's the part that keeps historians up at night. Up next was another astronaut death that was broadcast live for the entire world to witness: the Challenger crew. On January 28, 1986, 7 astronauts, including Krista McAuliffe, on board, a school teacher was about to give the world's most expensive geography lesson from orbit. Across the country, millions of kids were huddled around classroom TVs, convinced they were watching a legend unfold. And for the first minute, it looked like a textbook success. But space travel has a funny way of reminding you that textbook doesn't account for a freeze-frame morning in Florida. 73 seconds in, a tiny rubber O-ring, a part probably smaller than your lunchbox, gave up on life because it was too cold to do its job. 58 seconds into the ascent, the cameras caught a flicker of smoke. From there, the physics of disaster took over. Hot gases escaped, the fuel tank turned into a Roman candle, and the Challenger didn't just break apart, it plummeted toward the Atlantic at 200 miles per hour, a speed that makes survivable a word that doesn't even exist in the manual. And here is the part that'll keep you up at night. The explosion didn't actually kill the crew. The cabin stayed intact for the fall, meaning for 2.5 terrifying minutes, the crew wasn't just victims of a blast. They were passengers on a ride with no brakes and no exit strategy. The dream of the stars didn't just stall that morning. It shattered on live television. While this disaster, seen by millions, was a moment that stopped a nation, just a few years down the line, history repeated itself, as another NASA flight led to a death sentence for another 7 astronauts. The Columbia crew, Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, alongside Chawla, Brown, Clark, and Ramon. These aren't just names in a NASA ledger. They're the faces of a tragedy that should have stayed in the history books. 17 years after Challenger, NASA finally had its swagger back. The shuttle program was humming, confidence was high, and space felt routine again. But in aerospace, routine is just another word for deadly comfort zone. February 1st, 2003. Columbia was coming home. The mission was a success. The landing was scheduled, and the coffee was probably still warm in mission control. But the real disaster didn't start in orbit. It started at T+82 seconds during launch. A stray piece of foam insulation broke off and clipped the left wing. NASA saw it on the replay. The engineers flagged it, but the suits in management brushed it off like a bug on a windshield. They figured the foam was too light to punch a hole in the armor. They even turned down a chance to have the Department of Defense take high-res selfies of the wing, basically telling the experts, "Thanks, but we've got this." Spoilers, they didn't have it. During reentry, superheated plasma, we're talking 3,000 degrees, or roughly the temperature of a YouTube comment section, torched the wing's internals. The autopilot fought like hell to keep the shuttle level, firing thrusters until it literally ran out of sky. At 8:59 a.m., Commander Rick Husband's last words were cut off by a wall of static. For a few haunting moments, the crew cabin held together, a lonely pod falling through the Texas sky. But the vacuum of space doesn't wait. Depressurization likely took the crew into unconsciousness in seconds. By the time the cabin disintegrated, they were already gone. Once again, America was huddled around their TVs, watching a streak of white smoke turn into a funeral procession across the morning sky. 7 heroes lost. It was a brutal reminder that when you play chicken with the laws of physics, the house always wins. Another shuttle lost, another crew gone. But not every legend's story ends in flames. Some end in silence, like this one that was taken by mere medical error and $6 million secret. Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong spent his post-NASA years doing something even harder than landing on the moon, staying out of the spotlight. While every other celebrity was chasing a camera, the first man to touch another world was busy enjoying a quiet life in Ohio. He survived the cold, dead vacuum of space and the literal mission impossible just to come home and deal with something as mundane as heart surgery. On August 25, 2012, at 82 years old, the engines finally cut out. On the surface, it looked like a peaceful old age exit. No explosions, no tragedy, just a legend fading to black. But it turns out the man who conquered the heavens was brought down by the one thing NASA doesn't allow: a preventable human error. Turns out, after his successful heart surgery, Armstrong started bleeding into the membrane around his heart. Instead of rushing a national treasure back to the OR for emergency surgery, the hospital reportedly took him to a catheterization lab, the medical equivalent of taking a Ferrari to a golf cart mechanic during a blowout. Medical experts later called it a preventable mistake that likely cost him his life. Fearing the PR nightmare of being the hospital that killed the Moon Man, they quietly cut a $6 million check to the family to keep the story grounded. But you can't put a price tag on a hero, and you definitely can't settle with history. And then there's someone who had a rarest ending of all these astronauts, even decades after his first trip to space.
John Glenn, the first American to ever orbit the Earth.
But Glenn's story didn't end with a splashdown. He went from the cockpit to the Capitol, serving as a US Senator before deciding that, at 77 years old, he had one more spaceflight left in the tank. Because, apparently, once you've seen the curve of the Earth, a Florida retirement home just feels a little too grounded. When he finally passed away at 95 in a Columbus hospital, it wasn't a rocket failure or a lunar mishap that got him. It was just time catching up. But here's where his death gets X-Files levels of weird. While the public saw a hero, the Pentagon saw a political pawn. Ever heard of Operation Dirty Trick? Declassified docs reveal that in 1962, the government actually discussed using Glenn's potential death as a get-out-of-peace free card. If his mission had crashed, the plan was to fake evidence blaming Cuba for electronic interference, just to have an excuse to start an invasion. It's the ultimate hold-my-beer moment in Cold War history. And the secrets didn't stop there. After his historic flight, JFK secretly banned Glenn from ever flying again. He was too valuable to lose, which is basically the ultimate backhanded compliment. We love you so much, John, that we're grounding you for the rest of your life. Glenn didn't even find out he'd been bench pressed by the president until he read it in a biography decades later. Talk about a spoiler alert. From fires on the launch pad to disasters broadcast live, and even quiet deaths decades later, these legendary astronauts prove that the risks of space exploration never truly end, whether on Earth, in orbit, or on the journey home. In the end, every mission pushed humanity forward, but it also came with a cost that history will never forget.